I wake up, well, I know I'm gonna be the man who wakes up next to you. When I go
I can't believe I'm going to say this out loud, but I'm going to rebuild the rear suspension for the 4th time. If you watched the last episode, you know that we tried 3 different suspension styles, and I wasn't super hyped on any of them. And I settled on one, but now we're just going to do what I probably should have done, and that's just a parallel 4-link with a panhard bar or a track bar.
But I would walk 500 miles and I would walk 500 more to be the man who walked 1,000 miles to fall down at your door.
All of the last 3 suspension styles would have been fine if we weren't using trailing arms to mount our shocks.
Check out your trailing arm. Look how flat that is now. Where it mounts?
Oh yeah.
They're going straight up and down now.
Well, shocks will be happy here.
Yeah. Your side's gonna droop down way more than that. This is definitely max compression for me. So I don't think we're gonna have an issue with the panhard bar. I think that's gonna work out just fine where it is. We made bed mounts for the back of the J truck. Now I've got a boatload of welding. By the end of the week, I want this on wheels and tires. Preferably I'd like it on suspension to where we could actually roll it around if we wanted to.
If we're gonna hit the goals that I've set for us this week, Nick and I need to divide and conquer. So he's gonna be living in this grinding room, unfortunately, for a little bit, cleaning up these DIY beadlocks, getting them ready for testing. And at the same time, I'm gonna be out here on the welding table, just finish welding as much stuff as possible. First, I'm gonna start with all the suspension, and I've little sidebar. This is my first time doing this this radius arm kit from Barnes, and I love how much surface area there is for weld. These are very well thought out, and they bolt right in to the 05 and up Super Duty front axle. So that saves us a ton of work on this front end with having to like clear the axle and put new, brackets and stuff on it. We're just gonna adapt to it with this kit from Barnes. And once everything's all finish welded, we can finally start painting, and I'll start working on the rest of the suspension mounting on this chassis. I have never seen dually beadlocks. This is not something I could just go out and buy. At least I don't think I can. And so we did our own. This is a kit that we bought on eBay. I wish that I had cool tools like Rudy where we could just blast it out. It's so cool that he has a plasma table. We're not there yet. So we ordered a kit on eBay, we welded it. Nick just grinded all these nice and smooth, and we're at the testing phase. And if you've never seen this done, it actually works surprisingly well. And this is something that I saw on Extreme 4x4 many, many years ago. I'm pretty sure that's where I saw this technique. We're just gonna soap up the outer edge here. And then I take an air nozzle and we just blow it from the back. Oh, there's a leak right there. So let's see, where about, that's like right on the edge. So what I like to do, just because it's kind of easy to weld through it, is I mark it with a Sharpie. Put a little X. And I've never had porosity by just welding right through Sharpie before. There's another one. So now we're gonna go through this process on every single one of these wheels. We'll weld back over any of these little spots where air's getting through. We should have some wheels ready to mount some tires soon. Somewhere between 5 and 10 years ago, these DIY beadlock kits were super hot. Everybody was buying them. It was a great way at the time, it felt, to save money. But then once you install a kit or two, you realize that the amount of time it takes to do this sucks so hard, and it's so much worse than you remember it being. So for that reason, there's only like a couple companies that are even making these now. I think it's just because the demand has absolutely tanked. But I think that for the right situation, like our situation, we can't get dually beadlock wheels, and even if we could, the cost would be insane for that, I'm sure. So a DIY beadlock kit makes a lot of sense for us. Or if you have some like off-brand 4x4 that you really like, but it has like a strange bolt pattern or strange offset, and you can't find any aftermarket support, a DIY beadlock kit makes perfect sense for you. But if you're watching this and you're thinking you're gonna get DIY beadlock kits just to save some money, you You really don't. You can find some pretty good deals on beadlocks out there these days, and so I would just shop around and do anything but this if you have the flexibility. And as you're going to find out later in the video, we're going to have some pretty big trials and tribulations associated with these beadlocks that we just fabbed up. These wheels are getting close, and I've got this weird copper colored spray paint that I want to test as like a bronze color for these wheels. I'm so glad that I tested this paint against a white primer first, because then it made me realize that it's just a little bit too bright. I want to darken it up a little bit, so I started with a black primer whenever I did it on the wheels, and it looks so much more bronze and a little bit less copper. And I'm aware that I'm splitting coppery, bronzy hairs here, but I really want this to have like that dark bronze look, and I think with the hammered texture that comes from this type of paint, it's going to help hide some of the imperfections in these, you know, many hundreds of thousands of miles on these stock dually wheels.
And you had my tires.
Well, but if you want to build a trailer, you need the tires to be close to each other, and then you're going to make it a little longer.
But they're my tires, and the only tires working next to each other are super little tires.
Well, if you need to see how a trailer looks, go down and look at my trailer. Morning, Nick.
Trying to get that sweet whistle on camera.
Yeah, dude. You fire it up and rev it. Everybody loves a good free rev. Dude, that sounds so good. How about being on camera before you even punch in?
Love that.
Love that. I got that I Would Walk 500 Miles song stuck in my head. Tell me you don't too. You can't start a video like that and not just like ruin somebody's whole Sunday because that's all they can hear in their head. So now I thought about it a bunch last night. I was wanting to do a bunch of stuff in bronze, but I think it's going to end up looking corny. Let me fire up this generator so we have light. Well, the light works good for me, but doesn't work great for the camera. We're just going to do this in black. I think for that bronze color, what I think is going to work the best is probably going to be maybe the steering in bronze and definitely the cage in bronze. But we don't want to just do the wheels in bronze. I want to have something else small like that that's accented on the truck. So, I don't know, what would you do? It's too late. I'm already going to paint these black right now, but I'm just kind of curious. Do you think I messed up? Should I have done them in bronze? I think that it would end up being too much, and I don't want it to look corny. I want it to look good. The last DIY beadlock set that I ordered had the option to select anti-coning rings, and so that's what I did. In this instance, the ones that I ordered didn't have that option. So we're gonna make our own anti-coning ring and then try to mount things up and run into some pretty big problems. I didn't know that dually wheels you load from like the mounting surface side of the wheel whenever, and I didn't even think about it. So the drop center, like the part that's in the wheel that allows you to like slip things on from one way or the other, makes it to where you're supposed to load it in from the inside, and that's a huge problem whenever you have a weld-on beadlock because you have to load it from the outside. But we did actually try to mount it from the inside. So what happened was the first one went on pretty well. The second one, Nick didn't quite have enough lube on it, but that's not, it destroyed the tire. But it wasn't because of the lube. It's because there's just not enough space for this tire to be loaded on from the front. So we're gonna have to do something really tricky here in order to remedy this problem. And I think what we're gonna do is set up a jig. We're gonna try to grind off like a 1/4 inch or so off of the DIY beadlock side. I'll weld, do whatever we have to do in order to make it work. And then hopefully with it being a little bit smaller, we can get the wheel to drop in from the front instead of from the back, because when we tried it from the back, that didn't work either. It looks smooth enough, but you can totally tell I'm gonna have to re-weld all that.
I got to the cracking part there.
Yep.
Just recently.
Yep. I'm gonna have to re-weld all that, all the way around. Well, at least I have a jig to weld on, so that's nice. So, what was the measurement of these front wheels, which we had 0 problems with? Do you remember?
That was 18 and 9/16.
Whatever. There's
Yeah.
well, it was smaller.
Just slightly bigger than.
Oh, it was bigger than this,
Yeah.
but the difference is the placement of the drop center.
Yeah.
So the drop center is on this side instead of on that side. Because these are supposed to be loaded from the back, and those can be loaded from the front. But apparently it's not common with dually wheels, I would suspect, for the drop center to be up here. So, although back and front is relative, right, because it's a dually. So this actually mounts the opposite way traditionally in the front tires. So you could consider that the front, but I don't because I welded rings on it.
This is a humongous setback. I mean, imagine if we could just went and got the wheels that we needed from the get-go. The amount of hours that we have in building these wheels would be used towards all the other stuff we have to do to the truck still. So it sucks, but it's life. And whenever it's all said and done, this is going to be pretty sweet. It's just we've got to work through these trials and tribulations and stuff in order to get to the goal.
So what do you think, Chris? Is this big enough for 3 trucks? Maybe? Well, once I'm done etching this out, we'll have to back something in here.
8, like 7 or 6 or maybe 8 lawnmowers. The lawnmowers are pretty tiny.
8 lawnmowers? It could fit a lot of lawnmowers, but I want to park 1, 2, 3 trucks over here with a roof over them.
In case
And
of
I want to
rain.
get this built before winter
And
happens.
maybe if you want to go like another spot like there, then you could build a barn.
Build another barn?
Like right
I was
there.
thinking we'd plant more veggies and fruits and stuff in here next year.
Okay.
As our summer is coming to an end, time management is getting tough. There's some things that I have to get done before winter, and I mean, unfortunately, one of them is this J truck, but I can't spend 100% of my time on the J truck because I also got to be a dad. I've got to be a property owner and do some basic maintenance before winter comes. And to be completely honest, it's kind of nice to step away and, you know, take a breather from the problems you're having in the shop every once in a while. So sitting in this little machine, getting some dirt work done was actually very necessary.
Well, the Samurai fits. This doesn't fit anywhere. I don't want to store it in our shop because it just takes up a bunch of space when I want the shop to be for building, not for storing. So because of that, I need to build some sort of a lean-to back here. So I'm thinking like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 6x6 posts, and then like a metal lean-to roof. And then I can park the Samurai back here. The winters are brutal on trucks like these up here in the Pacific Northwest, so I need to keep it covered. So this winter, well, I don't know if we're gonna finish the TJ, but the TJ will go here. I'm hoping to start on it this winter, then probably the Land Rover Discovery. This is not sponsored. I want to be very clear about that. I bought this, but I've heard great things. That's been on my radar for a few years, so I bought some a while back, and I'm thinking we're going to use this to repair the little like cuts and tears and stuff that we put in these beads for the tires. We'll see. We're going to start there, and then hopefully with the modifications we've done to these wheels, we get a tire on the wheel.
In the interest of clarification, the reason that we have these cuts in the bead is because the dropout is on the wrong side of the wheel, making it difficult for us to get the tire into that dropout, and we overstretch the bead, which then forces the bead into a part of the machine that is like putting a little cut in the bead. It's not a big deal, honestly, just because if we glue this together and then we flip the tire over, then we're going to have a fresh bead to now try to slip over, and hopefully with the modifications we've done to the wheel, this is going to work.
I'm nervous, Nick. Freshly MIG'd and then TIG'd. Can't decide on what process to do? Do them all. Everything you got. Oh, please, tire gods. Okay. There! Woo! I'll take it. Oh boy.
It's interesting that Rudy and I's videos ended up timing out to where we're doing beadlocks at the same time. And what he did is he cut the lip off all the way around the wheel, which is kind of what we ended up doing. We ended up grinding it all the way around the wheel, but it was for the same reason. And you might ask, so if I was to do it again, is that what I would do? Would I cut the lip off all the way around? To be honest with you, if I was to do it again, I wouldn't do DIY beadlocks at all. And even in a situation like this where you can't get a beadlock wheel, I might weld like a rock ring or something around it. But I think what I would do is a set of those internal beadlocks, the ones that you like air up from the inside. They're expensive, but honestly, when you're buying DIY beadlocks for 8 wheels anyway, you're gonna be throwing some cash at it. So I think if I was to do it again, I would just do those. I'd save myself all the expense of man hours that we spent into these, and I would just go another route from the get-go. Nick and I are going to go back to dividing and conquering. He's going to work on the front axle. Basically, with the front axle, we're just going to clean it up a whole bunch. I might consider adding 2 tabs for hydro assist or something, but I don't know. I can do that in the future too. Right now, I just want to get it cleaned up, painted, put back under there so that we can bolt suspension to this, and then we can bolt tires to it and start to guess on a ride height, which is really exciting. I want to get these axles painted and installed into the truck for the last time, which means we need to do lockers, I need to mount brakes on the rear axle, and then we need to do some like trimming and clearing to increase the clearance of the rear axle.
This is a 13-bolt diff cover. So it's for a 14-bolt, but the way that they build it, it allows you to cut this whole little strip off the bottom of the diff, and it gains us a whole bunch of clearance. So we are looking at almost 1.25 inches of clearance that we're gonna gain. It was like 1.1 inches or something like that. We could do the full-on shave kit, but it is a boatload of work, and you only gain like another 1/2 inch or so of clearance. And my theory, and we'll test it, is that I think we're gonna end up having way more diff clearance than your average 14-bolt would anyway, because the inside of our inside dually is gonna be like right here. And I think that that is going to make it to where we're not going to hit our diff very often anyway.
As off-roaders, we all want the most clearance possible and like the most slippery bottom bits as possible. So I want to try to strike a balance between retaining the strength of the lower part of this 14 bolt, like we don't want to like crack it on a rock or something, but at the same time making it, getting rid of some of this extra meat, some of this low-hanging fruit to make it to where it can slip and slide over rocks easier than it would be if it was in stock form.
I know a lot of people grind this lip completely off. This is clearly extra beef to shore up the strength of this cast section. And I just don't think that that's gonna be a good idea. So what I wanna do, instead of grinding so deep that we get rid of these threads, is I'm gonna fill these threads with weld. I've got some cast iron rod. I'm glad I saved a little from the last bit that I did. And then I'm gonna let it cool. We don't need to go too crazy because all we're doing is filling it and grinding it. And then instead of taking this lip completely off, which is what a lot of people do, this rib, let's just call it a rib. Instead of taking this rib completely off, I'm just gonna smooth it in a way that it's slippery, because you can break anything on a rock, man. So that's why I'm thinking we're gonna go this route, where we still have plenty of beef and we still have a rib here, but we don't get hung up on all this stuff, because this would clearly grab a rock and keep your truck from going forward.
because I deleted this 14th bolt, I could see a world where it could be difficult to keep this from leaking back here. So I built up a little bit of extra weld on the inside. I thought it was gonna be like another 1/4 inch or so, but it ended up being, all said and done, like another 1/8 inch of sealing surface. Not a lot, but hopefully it will help keep this from leaking. We'll see, time will tell. I have a feeling that if I put too much extra weld in here, then it's gonna be difficult to get the ring gear in and out with the carrier, so I'm just kind of adding some. I'm already here, I'm already welding. Hopefully this will make it to where it will be less prone to leaking long term.
Oh, I like that. That is slippery.
This is one of those brackets that would be so nice if we had a plasma table. Just spending like 30 minutes or 40 minutes designing it on a CAD file and then just cut it. It would be so cool. But anyway, what we're doing here is I'm upgrading the rear brakes to disc. This was drum, this 14 bolt. We're kind of playing the system here, but I confirmed with Ian, this is well within the rules. So maintenance does not count towards your budget. So if you take your stock brakes and you put new stock replacement brakes, just brakes that like bolt in there, on the vehicle, then it doesn't count towards your budget. I am reusing the brakes that came on the Dodge chassis, the front brakes. They're single piston caliper, disc front brakes, and we're gonna put them on the rear of this 14 bolt. And if I just upgrade those brakes that were on there with many hundreds of thousands of miles to these power stop brakes, it is all well within the rules. I've confirmed this with Ian. So we're gonna be able to drastically upgrade the braking power of this truck, which in my eyes is a safety concern anyway. And we're going to be able to do it on the cheap because all we have to do is just make a couple of brackets to mount these calipers. And that's a giant upgrade for us at zero cost to us, as far as, well, we'll say like $10 in steel or something like that. It's just the weight of the steel. But unfortunately, these rear brackets are a little bit complicated. I didn't want to cut them out of one big sheet. I cut them out of like a couple small sheets, and I could have saved myself some time on a few different fronts here. But in any case, we've already got these brackets most of the way made. So now I'm going to cut them, I'm going to weld them together, and then we have a way to mount a very inexpensive, very important upgrade on this truck.
Looks so much better with brakes on it. Look at that. So doing your own brakes in the rear, there's kits and stuff online. I don't know how other people do this, but I think that it's really important to make sure that you seat the brake like multiple times as you're tacking everything to make sure that everything's exactly where you want it. I had little bits of cardboard run along the top, and that was just to give me a cheat, just like a little cheat piece in there to make sure that we had a really good gap between the caliper and the rotor. And there's like a perfect, I don't know, 3/16 gap or something in there, a little bit over an 1/8, somewhere in that range. So everything is seated nicely, everything spins exactly like it's supposed to, and our pads should wear evenly and correctly, and this gap between the edge of our rotor and the pad is like perfect all the way around. So I'm very happy with these. Also, make sure that when you do this, you have your bleeder facing up. If you have your bleeder facing down, you will never be able to bleed the rear brakes. Like I said, this is the front brake, the single piston front brake that was on the 99 Dodge chassis. And that's a huge piston, don't get me wrong, but this is the 2008 Ford F250, F350 front caliper. Look at that guy, dual piston. So one of the big motivations to going with the 08 and up Super Duty wasn't just the fact that we have like, bigger ball joints, stronger axle shafts. It's a high pinion instead of low pinion. There's no brake on one side of the axle shafts, all that. But the brakes are like way undersold as a benefit of going with a modern big front end like this. This truck is gonna probably, like fully loaded down, we're gonna be at like 8, 9, 10,000 pounds, something crazy like that. And we gotta make sure that this actually stops. I am concerned that we might need to add a proportioning valve, but this is one of those things where until we actually get it out on the road and we actually stop and we're on
dually 37s and all this stuff, it's just gonna be hard to predict how it's gonna act.
The next little bit of work, or a lot of bit of work in this case, is gonna be gears and lockers for the front and rear axle. We're gonna do a automatic locker in the rear, Yukon Grizzly. We're gonna do a Yukon zip locker in the front, which is a selectable air locker. And then the next time that we slide these under the truck, they'll be painted, they'll stay under there for the duration of the build. And as excited as I am about all this work, all work and no play does make Nate a dull boy, and I'd like to take a moment to just stare at it and daydream with the tires underneath the truck.
Ooh, Dirt Reynolds, you looking so good. Man, that is like the widest all-terrain I've ever seen. It's stretched out on that wheel. That looks really good, and it totally matches the dually vibes we got back there. Woo! With this a couple inches higher, I think it is gonna look so good. And so far, it doesn't look like super body swapped. The amount of frame that we have hanging down there is like what you'd see in any like stock Silverado or anything like that. I don't think that it is an eyesore, because a lot of body swap trucks have that. But this it just looks beef, dude. I think that our rear tires are gonna be very close to this, but I don't know yet until we actually get it in there. And I mean, who knows? We might have to have a wheel spacer because of clearance. I don't really know yet. But, you know, these 37s do fit inside of those wheel arches really well. So if I can adjust the suspension to like center this and nest really well in there throughout its suspension travel, we might be able to just straighten out these factory flares. I don't know. I don't want to count my chickens or anything. But I've got some ideas to basically extend the factory flares if we need to. And the front flares, man, they're like made for a 37. So again, visualize it 2 or 3 inches higher, and this is gonna be such a good looking truck. Almost ominous. This thing wants trails bad. With all the Dana axles that I've done, like this Super Duty Dana 60 over here, the first thing I'll usually do is set the pinion depth. I want to see the pinion's relationship to the ring gear first, and once I get the pinion depth nailed, then I'll go back, I'll set the pinion preload. But with this, I can do it the opposite way. I can do it whatever way I want, because the pinion drops out of the front of the housing, unlike a Dana axle, where this doesn't come out this way. You've got to knock the pinion in through the back. It's a lot harder to set up the pinion depth on a Dana axle, because you're gonna be like constantly pulling that pinion back out, stacking shims, or you're gonna be doing a crush sleeve and whatever, and you've got to do it like over and over and over, and it's a pain to get it in and out over and over and over. Whereas with this is the whole thing right here. We're gonna be able to set our pinion preload right over here on the vise, and it's gonna be so much easier to get it dialed in without having to pull it in and out of the housing over and over and over. That said, we are going to be using a crush sleeve because that's what came with the install kit from Yukon, and these can be a little tedious. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pre-crush the crush sleeve to meet this spec that came off of the factory pinion gear. I do have a backup crush sleeve over there. They sent two, so as you can see, these are different heights. The hardest part of crush sleeves is getting them to start crushing. So I'm going to start it on the vise. We're going to get it to where it's going, and then we can finish our pinion preload on here. And when I say pinion preload, what I'm talking about is how hard do we have to turn this in order to spin the pinion. So the drive shaft goes into here, this goes on to here, this will slide all the way down, and how hard is it to spin this pinion? And that measurement is going to be changed based on the relationship between two bearings. So we have this bearing here, we have this bearing here, and the closer we get and the more we crush down in between these races, the tighter this preload's gonna be. So there's a factory spec that we need to get to. If it's too loose, it's not gonna be good. If it's too tight, it's obviously not gonna be good. So in order to establish a change in this distance, we're gonna be crushing down this crush sleeve in here, and that's gonna make it to where we have exactly the right amount of drag whenever we spin that pinion and ensure that it's gonna perform exactly like the engineers intended it to.
Setting your preload with a crush sleeve can be extremely annoying, extremely trying, but I promise, if you pre-crush it just a little bit and then use like your strongest impact, it's not so bad. So we're using this Hercules impact with the biggest battery I've got, and this thing generates a ton of torque. So little by little, we're gonna crush this thing down, and then I notice there's usually a tiny bit of spring back, so I'll just kind of crush it down a little bit to where it feels like it's really tight, bring it out just a touch, and then see, you know, how much preload do we have. And what's interesting about these 14 bolts is they require a ton of pinion bearing preload. For comparison, the rear axle in a Toyota Land Cruiser requires like 8 to 11 inch-pounds of preload, whereas this 14 bolt requires 20 to 35. And mine ended up being pretty tight. It was like 30 or so, which is like the tightest preload I've ever put on a pinion. But according to the spec in the Yukon book, this is acceptable.
This is a Yukon Grizzly locker, and I've got to admit, I've never installed one in a 14 bolt like this. So, and it's the weekend, I didn't even call anybody that I know that has installed them just to even see how it goes in. But it looks to me like this wing nut setup holds these springs compressed so that you could probably get this together. And then I imagine we'd have to reach through that hole, undo the wing nut, or undo that bolt. So, I don't know. I think what I'm going to do is clean these sides up, pull the guts out, we'll drop that in there, and then I guess we're going to have to put our ring gear on there, torque everything down, and then undo this and see what happens. Do you hear that? I hope the camera's picking that up. What we're hearing is the backlash. We're hearing the amount of play between the two gears. So between the ring gear and the pinion gear, there's a certain amount of backlash that we're looking for. And the measurement is done in thousandths. And according to the Yukon book, we want 6 to 10 thousandths. I've done enough ring and pinions now that that's like 3 to 4. And the reason I know that, it's just super, super tight. So we need to loosen it up just a little bit. And what's nice about the 14 bolt is in order to do that, all we got to do is loosen up one side and then tighten up the other. And we're just going to move this ring gear away from the pinion a little bit, and it's going to loosen up that backlash. Can you hear that changed? And now we can see the gear moving. I bet we're like right at 10. So I want it just a hair tighter. Let's go like that much. That's tighter. Okay, let's switch that up. Now, unfortunately, my dial indicator lost a portion of itself during my move, I guess, but I'm gonna see if I can get a reading on this. Oh yeah, so we're looking at like 9, almost 10. So I'm gonna tighten it up a touch more. Oh boy. So now we're making the gears closer together. Ooh, too tight. What's nice about this versus Dana axles is Dana axles, every time I want to make this adjustment, I pull the carrier out. We're adding shims to one side, removing them from another, hammering it back in there. Whereas with this, we're just using these adjusters like you'd see with a Ford 9-inch. That's better. Oh yeah, that's like 7. So between 6 and 10 is our margin of error. So now we can paint it and see how the pattern looks.
Admittedly, this is the Cliff Notes version on how to do this job, but I've already got very detailed videos on this channel that really break down all of these details. And between this video, if you feel like you could do it after watching this, I highly recommend watching one of those other videos that breaks it down detail by detail. And I promise this is not as big of a job as a lot of people make it.
In your Yukon book that comes with all the ring and pinions, it's got an acceptable patterns list, and we nailed it. We're absolutely money. And this is one of the things that I absolutely love about installing Yukon brand ring and pinions, is that I would say 7 out of 10 times, if I just throw the factory shims back in there, whenever I install the new ring and pinion from Yukon, it's like money, or just barely off, right? Where I just maybe need to take a couple thousand off one side or the other or something like that. But this is one of those situations where we save so much time because we have a quality gear set, and I just threw the factory shim in there behind the pinion, and this is checking the depth of our pinion, right? We don't have to make any changes. It's perfect. I can basically take the bolts out, I can torque everything down to spec, and we can move on to the other stuff in the truck instead of spending a whole day just removing and reinstalling and removing and reinstalling. So what you're looking for is you want these rub marks to be within these 4 quadrants, we'll call them. There's fancy names for all this stuff: drive, coast, toe, and heel, but it's just you and me talking. We'll call it whatever we want. We'll say the inside, the outside, the peak, and the valley. So 4 quadrants. You can even number them, 1, 2, 3, 4. You want the rub mark to be right in between all of them. You don't want it to bleed off into quadrant number 3, or the valley, or whatever we want to call it. You want it to be right in between, and that's on the drive side or the coast side of the ring gear, meaning that you want that to be centered on both sides of the teeth. And in this case, the rub mark's centered. It looks great, so we don't have to change anything. But what's nice about the Yukon book is it'll show you, it's like, oh, the pinion is too close if your pattern looks like one of these. Well, if the pinion's too close, that means we need to add shims to bring the pinion out just a little bit to change that relationship, and then hopefully bring it to within an acceptable range.
I do need to pull this carrier out one last time, because remember that weird wing nut thing that was like holding the locker together? I did forget to pull it out before we dropped this in here. I was just kind of excited to get to the next step, and it was a step that I skipped. But luckily, we haven't put the cover on or anything like that. So pull it back out, take that apart, and reassemble everything. Make sure you follow all the torque specs that you can find on all this stuff. It's very important. I like to use red Loctite on the ring gear bolts, and I like to use red Loctite on any pinion nut that helps hold your pinion together, hold the yoke onto the pinion. Aside from that, keep your surfaces clean. Don't run any dry bearings. Add a little bit of assembly lube or gear oil or something, and I'm telling you, this job just really isn't that bad.
It's Mrs. Dirt Lifestyle's birthday, so happy birthday, Mrs. Dirt Lifestyle. Tell Mrs. Dirt Lifestyle happy birthday in the comments for me. That would make me and her very happy. She is the reason that she had all the faith in the world in me
to leave my job and try and do this as a job. She had like unwavering support the whole time. She deserves a happy birthday in the comments. So thank you so much for watching the video. And I hope that you vote for Team Dirt Lifestyle in the Onyx Build Challenge. And I hope that we can get the J10 there to compete with everybody else. If you're interested in Onyx membership, use coupon code Dirt Lifestyle to get 20% off. And if you want to save a boatload of money on Yukon gear and axle, lockers, ring and pinions, axle shafts, all that other kind of stuff, become an elite member. And then you can save money on all the Onyx Elite partners. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you on the next one.